Hey, you may be thinking that the housing market is completely rigged against you. Do you? Many people think that the housing market is rigged and that Wall Street landlords control the majority of homes throughout the country. According to one of my viewers, there's only one problem with the housing market: Wall Street landlords. In fact, they go on to say, get Wall Street out of housing and your problem goes away. When you're bidding against Wall Street, you can't win. Let me know, do you feel that way? Well, many people do, because during the pandemic housing boom, Wall Street landlords piled into the housing market. They drove prices up and they crushed affordability. And that's caused a lot of Americans to think, hey, I'm gonna own nothing and be happy. Let me know, do you feel that way? It's not surprising if you do, because the median age to purchase a house now is higher than it ever has been, over 50 years old for the median home buyer in the US. So no longer is it the first time younger home buyer starting a family, it's the buyer that actually has money and can afford a house now. And oftentimes the Wall Street landlords are paying cash and blocking people from home ownership. At least that's the way most people feel. But here's the part that nobody wants to admit about landlords. The real story about who controls all the rental housing in the US is nothing like you've been told. And on today's Housing Nerd video, I'm exposing the real truth about landlords. Before we get into the good stuff on today's video, my name is Jason Ferrier. I am the Housing Nerd, and I've been a realtor and investor right here in Central Ohio for the past 8 years. I hope you enjoy today's Housing Nerd video. Now, we've all seen the headlines, right? Big corporations buying up blocks, buying up neighborhoods of homes. In fact, according to many experts, those companies that own over 1,000 single-family rentals are considered institutional landlords. And many times, those companies are owned by massive Wall Street hedge funds. We're not just talking a few thousand houses here, folks. And if you look at this chart from Resi Club, we're not talking about like 1, 2, 3,000 homes, folks. We're talking 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, 86,000 homes. That's how many the top institutional Wall Street landlord, Invitation Homes, actually controls. Did you know that? And these large institutional landlords have strategically purchased in key market. If I look at this Resi Club map here on the screen, you can see where the institutional large landlords own the most stock of single family rentals. For instance, in Columbus, they own 1.31% of all single family rentals. In Cincinnati, 1.22%. Nashville, 2%. But if you go down south, the share of homes they own grows exponentially. Look at Memphis, 3%, so it's higher. Look at Atlanta, that may be the biggest concentration of institutional large landlords with rental market share. 4% of all homes in Atlanta owned by a large landlord who controls over 1,000 properties. In some other areas out there like Houston, only 1.3%, and Phoenix, 2.5%. Now, when you add up all the houses that these large landlords actually own, it's not a small number. Now, one has to wonder, how many homes do all these landlords own in total compared to the total housing stock of the US? Well, there are about 86 million single-family homes in the US. And of that, 15.7 million approximately are rental properties. And according to the Resi Club data, these institutional landlords own roughly 300 to 400,000 single-family rental properties. So now you're probably wondering, and rightly so, who owns all the other houses? Because remember, we've got 15.7 million rental single-family houses in the US, and the large Wall Street landlords own about 300 to 400,000 of those houses, leaving you with over 15 million single-family rentals currently in the US. And folks, somebody has to own them. And this is where the story takes a twist. 90% of all the single-family rentals in the US, 90% of all of them are owned by mom and pop. That's right, people like you, people like me, those landlords that own 1 to 5 properties, not 1,000. And so if you look at an area like Columbus, you can see that mom and pop landlords own 6% of all the single family houses, whereas institutional landlords only own 1.6%. Make no mistake, these mom and pop landlords are not real estate moguls. They're not billionaires. Some of them are accidental landlords. For instance, they may have been left the house from a dying relative, maybe a baby boomer who passed away, and now they own a single family house and they've kept it as a rental. And if you've inherited a property, or you may inherit a property in the future, and you're thinking about selling it, or maybe even turning it into a rental, I would think twice about selling it. You should stay tuned to the end of this video and you'll find out why. Some of these mom and pop landlords have bought rental properties strategically. They're not accidental. And they figured out that, hey, owning a few rental properties could be good for my long-term financial well-being. And they treat it like any other investment, like the stock market, like Bitcoin, like gold. It's a hedge against the future of inflation. They want to own a hard asset, one that actually cash flows. Now, I'm not a financial advisor, and I'm not here to convince you that real estate is better than Bitcoin. I'm just showing you what's going on under the hood. But let me know, do you think Bitcoin, maybe gold, maybe real estate is a better investment? Let me know in the comments. Now, when I bring the stat up about how most of the homes in the US that are rented are controlled by small mom and pop landlords, a lot of people don't want to hear that. They'd much rather hear a story about a big bad corporation coming in and swooping up the American dream. But folks, that's just not the reality. Now, I probably know what you're thinking right now, which is, housing nerd, you gotta be crazy buying rental properties right now. Like, why would you want a rental property? Why do 90% of all the rental properties, how are they actually owned by mom and pop landlords? I thought rental properties were a bad investment right now. A lot of people unfortunately think that. And they've been sold the idea from a lot of people not doing it themselves that, hey, they're not doing it, they don't want you to do it either. Again, I'm not trying to convince you to buy a rental property, just trying to show you the truth. You've probably seen a lot of fear mongering and craziness on YouTube about how rents are crashing, landlords are broke, going out of business, and with the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, and skyrocketing cost of doing business, owning a rental property isn't fun, isn't good anymore. Here in a few minutes, we're gonna look at some real numbers, and I'll let you decide if owning rental properties has any value anymore. And one of the things I hear from a lot of people who think that rental properties are going away or that landlords are doomed is that most people now don't want calls in the middle of the night. They don't want to be called when a tenant has a broken toilet, or they don't want to be called if a light bulb needs replaced. Trust me, I wouldn't want called either. And later in this video, I'm going to talk about how you can avoid that, at least how I do. Now, here's another piece of truth for you. Owning rental properties is not simple. It's not easy necessarily. It takes a lot of work. There is a lot of risk involved, and it has to be managed like a real business. It's not a passive investment necessarily, in many cases anyway, where you just sit back and collect your check every month. There is activity involved in owning rental properties, depending on what level of involvement you want. But it's not all roses and sunshine. I'm here to tell you that as somebody who owns rental properties right here in Newark, Ohio. And I'm not gonna tell you that you are gonna be a millionaire overnight from buying a rental property. That's just probably not gonna happen. This is a long-term approach. That's how I think it should be handled, not a get-rich-quick scheme. And owning rental properties is not for everybody. But what I'm not gonna do is give you an excuse to just ignore it because you've been told from people that aren't doing it that it's a bad way to go. Again, not here to give you excuses. I'm not here to sugarcoat things. I'm here to give you the raw facts. As a small investor, I'm gonna take you under the hood now and show you real numbers from one of my properties. I recently purchased a single family house for $200,000. I had to put $30,000 into repairs. So the total cost, 230 grand. Now I put 20% down, so that was 46,000 bucks. So that was the money out of my pocket, 46,000 as the down payment. And I was able to finance both the purchase of the property and the repairs in one loan. Those opportunities do exist, by the way. Now the rent that I'm collecting on the house is $2,500 a month. If I add up all the expenses, I'm looking at about $975 a month for all expenses, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and property management fee. Remember earlier when we talked about not wanting to be bothered in the middle of the night with a broken toilet? That's why I pay a property manager. I don't deal with it. You also have to add in my mortgage payment, which is a little over $1,300 a month. And my net cash flow after all expenses, including adding in a 15% maintenance fee for any problems that may arise in the future. So my net cash flow per month is $360. And if I figure in a measly 2% growth in home prices and a 2% rent growth, after 10 years, my cash flow is around 65 grand. And because I've been paying the balance down and gaining more equity, after 10 years, the total equity in the property is nearly $120,000. So the cash flow and the equity I've gained in 10 years being a mom and pop, not institutional landlord, is about $184,000 or a 400% cash on cash ROI. Now that looks good on paper, but in reality, that's probably not what's going to occur, right? There's going to be things that break, like I'm going to need a roof, even if I'm putting away money every month via the maintenance, the 15% maintenance fund, I'm still going to probably need some extra cash there to fix a roof, to put a new heating system in, whatever. And home prices right now, some areas are actually going down, so maybe it doesn't appreciate like I think it will. So again, it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I'm thinking 10 years in the future. I'm not looking at just next year. And I think that's where a lot of people try to avoid thinking of investing in real estate because they're thinking of tomorrow. They're looking at Bitcoin. They're looking at the stock market. They want to make a quick buck. Or they just sit on their hands, sit on the sidelines, and don't do anything. But for me, it helps to think long-term in the future. That way, if I have a month where I didn't make any cash flow, I'm not completely dejected. I'm like, all right, this is a long-term play. But now I'm gonna share a secret with you that many people have no idea exists. And in fact, there's a lot of misconceptions. Now, if you're a first-time home buyer, a young home buyer, or just somebody who's looking to break into real estate investing, there's an easier way to do this. And this is a way that the big institutional landlords can't actually accomplish. But there's a cheat code you can use to break into real estate investing, and it's an advantage you have over me and over institutional Wall Street landlords. And that, my friends, is a multifamily house hack. But if you really want to break into real estate investing or the real estate market in general, this may be one of the best ways. And not many people know about it. But before we get into that, let me clear up a misconception that's out there in the market right now. A lot of people I've heard recently talk about FHA loans. And we know that Lisa Cook with the Federal Reserve got busted because she used an FHA loan on 2 different properties, evidently, and she was caught because you have to have it as your primary residence if you're using an FHA loan, and that's true. But what's not true is that you can't rent out your FHA property. That's completely false. If you hear somebody say that, they don't know what they're talking about, or they don't want to admit the facts. And the facts are, if you use an FHA loan to purchase a property and you live in it for more than 1 year, in a lot of cases, according to HUD, and you can look it up on their website. And by the way, I'm not a mortgage professional, I'm a realtor, I'm an investor, but I do know a lot of these lending rules. So if you live in the property for a year, you can actually rent it out and it's completely legal underneath FHA guidelines. Now, you need to check the specifics with your situation, but make no mistake, you definitely can use an FHA loan to buy a rental property, even an Airbnb. You just have to live in it for the first year. Comment below. Did you know that? So there's a ton of investors right now that supposedly have committed FHA fraud because they're not living in the house that they're renting out. Well, guess what? You don't have to. Now, what you can't do is you can't have more than 1 FHA loan in your name at the same time. So if you were to rent out a property after living in it a year and you want to go buy something else, you're going to have to use a non-FHA loan. That's all. But here is where the multifamily house hack with FHA becomes your greatest weapon against Wall Street landlords. Properties that are 1, 2, 3, or 4 units, in other words, a triplex or a quad, those count as residential real estate. They're not commercial, and hence they fall underneath residential lending standards. And so one of the tricks of the trade that few take advantage of, but maybe you will, is to use an FHA loan, put just 3.5% down, purchase a triplex. And now, instead of the numbers I shared with you earlier, I'm gonna share the new numbers using the multifamily house hack. Let's say you purchase a triplex for $350,000. And this is actually a case study from somebody that I know in the investing world. You buy something for 350 grand, you put 25,000 in repairs in it. Because you only have to put 3.5% down as an FHA buyer, you're only putting down $13,125. Now let's pretend you can rent out 2 of the units for $2,000 each, and you're gonna live in the 3rd unit. And that's where the primary residence comes in, right? You have to use it as a primary residence for at least a year. So FHA says if you buy a multifamily building with 4 units or less and live in one of the units, that counts as your primary residence, as long as you live there for a year. So all in, the expenses are about $1,550. Now, because that building's more expensive, my mortgage is obviously higher. And so I need to subtract the $2,263 from my mortgage and the $1,550 for my expenses from my $4,000 in rent that I collected from the 2 units that I rent out. And so you're only left with $187 in cash flow. Not as attractive as that single family house, obviously. However, the devil is in the details. Remember that you're living in one of the units. Instead of paying rent to another landlord, making them wealthy, now you're basically renting from yourself. So if you add that $2,000 that you're not having to pay in rent anymore, and your mortgage is paid for by the other 2 tenants, your cash flow really is $2,187 a month. And if you do it right with the FHA loan, it's completely legal. But again, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a mortgage professional, so you need to seek professional guidance if you decide this is something you really want to do. But make no mistake, and don't get it twisted, this type of investing happens all the time. That's why 90% of all rental properties, single family rentals, by the way, are owned by mom and pop investors, people like you, people like me. Now, the last thing I'll leave you with when it comes to real estate versus other investments, that I've found anyway, is that it's nice to be able to control my investment. In other words, I'm really at the helm of how the property performs. And I'm not saying other investments aren't a good idea, but I do enjoy the fact that I control my rental properties and my destiny. But not everybody feels that way. Maybe that's you, maybe it's not. Now, you can believe what you want, you can do what you want. It's a free country. But if you really want to know what's happening in the real estate market under the hood, continue to watch The Housing Nerd, subscribe to my channel, share it. Let me know what you think about all the stuff I talked about today. And YouTube thinks you'll like my next video right here.